There was an interesting Wall Street Journal opinion article that came out this past week about how the US should build their own Belt and Road system, but it kind of didn't really understand what the Chinese Communist Party's Belt and Road system was. Like, it was
Mhm.
kind of like, well, we should do, China's getting a lot of success doing like a lot of this infrastructure investment around the world. The US needs to do the same.
Well, it's like the Marshall Plan.
Yeah, basically, it was treating the Belt and Road like it was the Marshall Plan, but that's not what the Belt and Road
It's a
is.
fundamental misunderstanding of the Communist Party's intention behind the Belt and Road.
What's the Marshall Plan for the audience that doesn't, if somebody watching doesn't know?
Well, so after World War II, Europe was, of course, in ruins, and the U.S. was concerned that the Soviets were going to have a lot of influence in Europe in terms of helping build infrastructure. And so one of the things the U.S. did, partly to help Europe, but also to counter the Soviets, was to invest a large amount of money and personnel into actually going into Europe, mostly Western Europe, to build infrastructure, help them rebuild all the stuff that was destroyed. And so it was a huge economic boost for Europe, and it solidified our alliances there. Of course, this is also like at the beginning of the Cold War, right? So you have to keep in mind like geopolitical tensions were a big part of it. And that's essentially what's happening now, right? Which is the Chinese Communist Party, or the new equivalent of the Soviet Union, right? So it's not just that the U.S., it would be nice if we helped developing countries. It's that it would be nice if we did that. And also, if we don't do it, the Chinese Communist Party is going to do it.
And now you made a point that the Wall Street Journal article, was it?
Oh, about the Belt and Road? Yes.
Yeah. So they were comparing the Belt and Road to the Marshall Project. Why is it not the same thing?
Well, I mean, fundamentally, the Chinese Communist Party is using it to, well, from an economic side, what they're doing is they're exporting their excess capacity. Like, if you think about China's GDP and how it's grown for many decades, it's actually through building things in China, even if those things were unnecessary, because that adds to their GDP growth. And now there are all these state-run companies and extra employees that, like, now that that type of growth is slowing down in China, there's nothing for them to build. So they're sending them to, the Middle East and Africa and Southeast Asia and all these other places. So these huge state-run companies can make money.
If they come, they will build.
Yes. Or something.
And it's also a good opportunity to ship a bunch of single men overseas to work and have jobs, which could otherwise be a problem inside China, where segments of the economy are slowing.
Yeah, so a lot of the projects are being built by Chinese workers, not local workers in these countries.
So that's the economic side of the Belt and Road.
Well, I mean,
from China's perspective.
From China's perspective. And also another economic benefit for them is that they're being paid, like, basically Chinese state-run companies, banks are loaning the money for these projects to these countries that are then paying these Chinese state-run companies to build the projects. So they're going to, like, get money and with interest from these countries that are going into debt to make these projects happen.
So in a nutshell, whereas the Marshall Project was about actually helping these European countries so they would become good allies with the U.S. instead of the Soviet Union, China's Belt and Road is more about benefiting the Communist Party and dealing with their own internal problems than actually helping.
I mean, there were geopolitical reasons for the U.S. to do the Marshall Project, too. It was
that's what I said about
I also don't think the Marshall Plan was so cut and dry like that, because like the U.S., so after World War II, because the U.S. did relatively little fighting compared to other countries. Like we didn't have like fighting on our own soil except for Hawaii briefly, right? And so we came out of the war with a ton of gold, an economic boom. For us, it was also exporting capacity, right? So American companies could make money in Europe. So I don't think it's not that there's no self-interest economically in that. I mean, but like obviously America is always the good guys. So that's the economic side of it. The political side of the U.S. Marshall Plan was to counter what we considered the dangerous Soviet Union and their interests, right? And what the Chinese Communist Party is doing politically is a little bit different with the Belt and Road.
Well, I mean, They're basically trying to essentially create vassal states.